everyone, it's Monica. Welcome back to Homeschool Voices. Today I'm very excited because I am talking with Brian Ray from the infamous NPR podcast entitled, How Should We Regulate Homeschoolers? Hey everyone, today I'm talking with Brian Ray. He is the president of the National Home Education Research Institute and also the editor-in-chief of the Homeschool Researcher. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining me.
Welcome. Glad to be here, Monica.
Yeah, so this all started in January with the NPR podcast that got so much traction. It was entitled, How Should We Regulate Homeschoolers? I like that title. I think if it was going to be fair, it would be something more like, Should We Regulate Homeschoolers? But it was not. So that was the setup of it. And based on the title, I would have thought that they would have spent a lot of time discussing all the ways that they want to regulate homeschoolers. But instead, they spent most of their time attacking homeschoolers. It was basically a hit piece. It sounds extreme, but I don't know any other way to say it. It was shocking.
It was a little harsh. I mean, they started off with, as you said, what's the question? Because we could talk about research, we could talk about researchers, we could talk about scholars, and people think, oh, you're supposed to be objective, and it's just the facts, ma'am, and we're just going to take the facts and we're going to interpret them and we're going to put them out neutrally. But that's not how anything is in the world, because even our questions show underneath what are our presuppositions, right?
Yes.
How should we regulate as one question? Should we regulate is a totally different question. And they jumped into it from that perspective. So, yeah, I mean, at the beginning, the one lady, they gave her, I don't know how long, but a long time, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes to tell her story. And I know we all love stories ever since we were children, but stories start off with an emotion. There's an emotion. And stories, depending on how stories always have a message behind them, almost always have a message behind them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the message was basically, well, I was homeschooled, so that sort of is supposed to set you, oh, cool, she must like homeschooling, she understands homeschooling, all those things. But lurking in the background was some kind of abuse, and I'm not going to say she was not abused, but the moderator asked a question gently, so we don't even know what that was.
No, we don't.
We do not know whether it means somebody yelled at her a lot. And this would all be from her perspective, right? Because in court, you get to hear both sides of the story, right?
Yes, and I was thinking of her parents. I'm like, man, that's
exactly.
harsh.
And then you have so I'm biased. I'm biased, Monica. I'm a Christian. So in the Bible, we have, the scripture tells us you hear from one person, you think, oh, that's right. But then you got to hear from the other person. I mean, that's right in the scriptures. So,
right. I don't know, that makes sense.
Yeah, we always hear these stories, even from our friends. I go, well, I believe her, she's my friend. Well, you know what? If she's saying something pretty negative about somebody else, you should probably think about it before you believe your friend. All right, so that was, in a sense, a setup. But let's get down to the question.
Well, go ahead.
No, go. I'll just blab the whole time. So you go ahead and interrupt me.
Well, I was just going to say how that it goes along with what you're saying, that the setup was, no matter what you see from a homeschooler, no matter how well-dressed and polite your kids are, no matter how well they interact with other kids, no matter how easily they talk to adults, there's something lurking underneath. And
yeah, lurking.
You can't trust your eyes.
Lurking.
I even think they said lurking.
Yeah. But it's just what it's always there. There must be something dark out there, right? After all, didn't public institutional schoolings come with God and the American flag and apple pie, right? So if you do something else, there must be something really weird about you, and so there's got to be a little doubt thrown in there. I was in a national television broadcast out of Portland, Oregon, and I don't know if it went just Oregon or a bit. This was over 20 years ago. The head of Oregon Public Schools stood up and said to the audience, there were 4 of us, like four stooges on 4 stools, and then she said to the audience, you must remember, public schools are what made America great. Like, what? She said that something like 25 years ago, and first of all, let's just assume and pretend America's great. Public schools made them great? What?
That's quite the statement.
What did she just say to Abraham Lincoln and his mom? Slap in the face. What did she just say to all the Catholic school graduates? Slap in the face.
Yeah.
What about all the the pagan independent private schools? Slap in the face. It's kind of crazy. So anyway, let's get back to that point of regulation. The first question really is, should home education be regulated? That's the question. That's if you're going to talk about government control. And you notice, I don't know if you noticed in the interview, I kept saying government control. Did you notice that?
Yes.
And he did, and he said, "Oh no, regulation." I said, "No, it's control. All regulation is control." And that's
what at one point, is it control? You said yes.
That's right. They just don't like the word, because nobody's supposed to be controlling, the government, but except the government, right? So how could we answer that question? Should home education be controlled or regulated? We have to ask, you have to ask you, I have to ask me, what are my basic values and beliefs about civil government jurisdiction, family jurisdiction, individual person jurisdiction, church jurisdiction, synagogue? We have to ask those questions. And those are hard, possibly long conversations, because those go way back to philosophy. That goes back to metaphysics, epistemology, axiology. Of course, they don't want to do that in a 1-hour NPR program, do they?
No.
They just want to jump in and say, how should we control homeschooling? And I've realized, and I've learned over the years, Monica, I'm not going to let that go. I cannot let that go, because what happens is, in the era in which we live, this is just my opinion, the large majority of university professors, most public school union workers, teachers, most media, they tend to have a worldview that is leftish, statist, administrative statist, neo-Marxist. And these are not, I'm not saying these like nasty labels, okay? It's just what they are, okay? On the other hand, we have people who are more classical liberal, libertarian, Christian ideas, which are not statist Marxists. They're not. No. So these are very different worldviews, and that's why I had to bring that up.
What's concerning about these worldviews is that there's the idea that Joshua Laughlin and Samantha Field on that podcast, and people like them, is that if you have a different idea, a worldview or different ideas, they're just wrong. You're just wrong. They're just wrong,
right? They're just wrong. And I think one of the difficult things is that people in our era, your era, it's hard to say there's absolute truth, okay? But here's the deal: the ones who are saying, well, of course we should control homeschooling, down deep somewhere, they have an absolute idea, don't they?
Yes, they do.
That the government must be the mommy and the daddy, and the sugar daddy and the sugar mommy, and the police officer to everybody to some degree, right? Because you cannot trust Americans to really do good things on their own. You have to have government somehow coming up with rules to make sure they do good things on their own.
Well, the fascinating thing to me about that is, okay, if the government's doing that, the government is a group of people. And it is a group of people that's coming up with the rules and the regulations. Yeah. And what if that group of people in a few years is not the same group of people?
Yeah.
Maybe that group of people agrees with you today, but in 5 years they don't agree with you.
Yeah. And what if that group of people making up the rules actually have some evil lurking in them? Whoa. Yeah. And we don't even know what that evil is. And maybe they have an evil lurking in them that someday, if they could just have enough control, they could take from you and they could control you more than you want. And I'm not exaggerating. We go back. People don't like me to bring this up, but it was, in fact, on the internet, it's like you have to be careful what words you use, right? Or somebody will censor you. Okay, so in order to not use a word that's really short, you have to use the word National Socialists. It's the National Socialists in Germany that banned home-based education. Yep. And guess what? Still today, Germany ban home education.
Supposedly for opposite reasons, which I don't understand.
Yeah, not really. And then Who else likes to ban home education right now? China.
Mm.
And the more strongly communist it becomes, again, the more it bans home education.
Yeah.
Cuba, there are people in jail because they decided to homeschool.
Right.
These are countries with very strong governments that like to control. Okay, so
you can control the thought of the population. If you have a huge part of the population at home, it's they're wild cards. You got a big chunk
people,
of wild
I mean, historians, philosophers of education know this. There's no question about this. Institutional schools are really good at putting into children values and ideas and beliefs so that they can be controlled and moved in a certain direction philosophically and politically. It's not a new idea. I mean, Plato knew it. Our philosophers of education, writers of history of education today, they all know it. They know it better than do most professors of education. They know it better than most teachers in public schools because they're not really thinking about that stuff. You know, like, oh, I just teach because I like kids.
Yeah.
Well, actually, what are you teaching in? Well, I'm teaching in a public school. How about if we call that a government school?
All right.
Don't call it that. That's scary. That's scary. But it is a government school. You know?
Accurate. It's accurate.
So how about should we go to a little bit the abuse thing?
Yeah. Well, yes.
That was implied.
That was the big trigger, you know.
It was. I mean, the whole setup was they had this lady saying, well, I was homeschooled and I homeschooled for a while, but now I'm not. And by the way, there was abuse in my family. Okay, well, that's clearly a setup, you know. And then the next lady was, well, we've got this database and this child's been, you know, let's not say it here, but, you know, this child's been, evil's been done to this child, evil's been done to that child, evil's been done. It's like she went on and on about.
Oh, just awful stuff.
It was horrible, you know. So now the question arises. Let's get this on the table right now, right, Monica?
Yeah.
With probably over 1 million homeschool families. Now, how many of us can even imagine what 1 million means? It's hard, right? Okay.
Large number.
With probably over 1 million homeschool families, are there going to be some parents who do bad, evil things to their children? Yes, there are.
Sadly, it's human nature. You're going to have it anywhere.
Yeah, and we don't need to talk about that a lot more. Now, here's the question, though. If we're going to say that because that happens, the government needs to control homeschooling more, first we have to establish that there is a problem that exists, all right? Okay, now, any evil done to a child is a problem. However, problems are relative, right? So you start looking at the data, and people, I'll refer people to this website, homeschoolingbackgrounder.com. It's not my website, I don't run it. Homeschoolingbackgrounder.com.
I'll link to it in the description.
The very little information we have right now, the rate of fatalities in homeschool families is less than the rate of fatalities due to evil deeds than in the public in general. Okay, so first of all, factually, there's no evidence that a problem exists. In fact, what you'd have to say is, if you really wanted to be honest, if that were the only statistic we had, you'd have to say, well, you can make this up. Correlation proves causation, which is false.
Yes.
But because the rate of fatalities is less in homeschooling, the government should try to get everybody to homeschool.
Exactly.
But this is how simple people are in their thinking. They don't get it, you know. It's kind of like this. I've seen a couple of articles where people did research on homeschooling, and in some studies, you might find on such and such an outcome, there's no difference between homeschool and public school kids. Okay, whatever. In some studies, more of them, you find homeschool kids do better, right? Academic achievement, whatever. And in some studies, you have mixed results. Homeschool kids do better on some things, worse on some things, okay? Then I've seen these studies where they go, well, okay, on X variable, there was no difference. But on Y variable, the homeschoolers did worse. And then they say, okay, now keep in mind, Monica, this is not an experiment. These are not representative samples. These are convenient samples, just like some research I've done has been convenient samples. Okay, but then they go, well, it's a convenient sample, but the homeschool kids did worse on this. Then they call it an at-risk population. Wait a minute. What if anybody like you read all the studies on academic achievement of homeschool kids compared to public school kids? What would you find? Who does better?
Well, I would think that homeschoolers.
They do. I mean, research I've been doing for 35 years, research by other people, on average, homeschool kids do better. Now, most of these studies are not cause and effect studies. They're just descriptions, right?
Yeah.
But by that same logic as those people saying homeschool kids are at risk in this descriptive study,
right,
we could say, whoa, public school kids are at risk academically. Mm-hmm. Everybody should homeschool.
I love that. I think we should just say everyone should.
It's just so simple. I mean,
it's
so simple.
Crazy.
But it's the same kind of thing, you know. Now to try to give as much credence as possible to the other two people who are on that radio show, they'll say something like, well, but you know, children being, you know, starved to death, that's way different. That's really, really bad. That's really egregious. Mm. And it is egregious. But they're assuming that what they should do is classify a group of people, and that's called profiling, right?
Yes.
Profiling. Let's profile homeschoolers, even though we do not have any evidence that children are more at risk there. But just because we have some stories, and because sometimes they do these evil things, and because we, the controller types, think that somehow homeschooling makes it more possible to do this evil, we should now profile a whole group of people called homeschoolers, mm-hmm, and lay extra laws and regulations on them to try to maybe stop potential evil.
And you mentioned something in the podcast about there not really being any correlation between government oversight and regulation with improved outcomes.
Yeah, I'm glad you caught that. And that was just a study that I did. And what I did, Monica, was I said, okay, there's this group. I don't necessarily want to give them a bunch of web traffic. There's this group who said, well, we've collected all the stories that we can on families who are homeschooling or allegedly homeschooling or supposedly homeschooling, and they did evil things to their children. So I said, okay, let's just assume for a minute that your database is relatively accurate. Mm-hmm. Let's just for the study, let's assume that. I'll take your own data and I will divide up the states into high government controlled homeschooling, medium government controlled homeschooling, and low government controlled homeschooling. Take all of your data and find out whether there's any correlation between degree of control of homeschooling by the state and amount of abuse or harm. No correlation.
Wow.
So whenever statistically, logically, if you cannot even find a mathematical pattern, it's very difficult to argue for a cause and effect relationship. So even the data they collected right now, as far as we know, that doesn't matter. You know, high regulation, low regulation, it does not appear to be even in a mathematical pattern with the amount of abuse.
And then something that just dawned on me I thought was interesting. So then of course they would say, well, it's not an exhaustive database. Right. But then they turn around and say that they want more regulation so we can protect people. And then I'm just wondering, well, this small percentage of people who are abusing their kids, just like in any population, mm-hmm, I don't understand why if there's more regulation, are they going to submit to being investigated, to being checked up on?
Yeah. It's, Monica, it's when you start to sort of, as they say, drill down into the nitty gritty of all of this. Mm-hmm. Let's just, okay, I said this on the radio. Mm-hmm. The reality is the people who want to do evil things to children, they're pretty smart about it, and they find ways to hide it, which is horrible. And did you notice? I think the moderator said, yeah, that's a good point. You know, it's like, really, you stop and think about it. I mean, this is not to, you know, throw in a red herring, but stop and think for a minute. The last information we had, and the U.S. Department of Justice says this, okay? They say about 10% of public school children will be sexually maltreated by public school employees.
Wow. Teachers,
administrators, coaches, counselors will be sexually maltreated by them by the time they graduate. Now stop and try to fathom that.
That's just crazy.
What's 10% of 50 million kids as we sit here today and talk? 5 million.
That's a lot of kids.
Right now, by the U.S. Department of Justice stats, 5 million children in the United States public schools will be sexually maltreated in one way or another, whether it's abuse, harassment, by public school employees by the time they graduate. Now, on top of that, Monica, what % of those public school children are abused by their parents? I don't have the stats in front of me. On top of that, what % of them will be abused by their peers in public school?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that it's nothing when a homeschooled child is harmed, but the problem is statistically so small compared to what's going on. And I've actually talked with Dr. Charol Shakeshaft. People can look this up. Charol, Charol, or we can do it later and put on your website, Shakeshaft. And there's a nonprofit she works with. She's a professor, and I've talked with her. She's the one who actually did the summary of studies that the Department of Justice quotes. And I've asked her, I said, why don't we have more information? The last solid information we had was from 16 years ago. She said, as far as she could, I'm not going to speak for her. I'll just put it this way.
Yeah.
Nobody can get funding to do those kinds of studies. What does that tell you?
I wonder why.
What does that tell you? I mean, what is going on in the public schools? And a lot of people know. I mean, I've had clients who are former public school police officers, and that is why they homeschool. Because of all the bad stuff that is being done to kids, by adults in public schools. It's horrific.
So with that in mind, what do you think motivates these kind of attacks against homeschoolers, like in this NPR podcast?
What motivates it? Oh, I'm not sure.
So many theories.
I'm not sure I want to say that. I am not sure I want to say that. I think, okay, this is hypothetical. I think that some people involved who were homeschooled either were or perceived that they were somehow harmed or abused or neglected or something by their homeschool environment.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into all the spirituality and psychology of that. And so, they think they need to do something about it. All right. But that's a very long, deep discussion that I don't think I want to have right here.
That's another
possibility is that there are good motives, and they just say, hey, even one child being harmed is bad, and it is the proper role of the government, which is philosophical, remember, to try to stop people before they do bad things. But that, Monica, is very different from what you have in a free nation. In a free nation like the United States, if you do something bad, then you are controlled or punished by the government.
Right.
Those are two very different understandings of law and justice. Okay, so in other words, my role, from my worldview, my role is to not try to make Monica be nice. Okay, Monica can be nice. She may cuss at me. She may be rude to me, but until she breaks a law, the civil government does not get to punish her or put her through due process to see if she's first you got to go through due process, right? Due process. Then if you're convicted, then you're punished.
Right. The opposite is just a presumption of guilt to begin with, and then trying to sort of prove that you're not guilty. You almost have to prove that you're not guilty. Right.
There's no research. Okay, so now let's take the prevention idea. That is not American freedom worldview. Prevention is not. Okay, you say, okay, so let's take a case. Okay, I was talking with a guy. He would self-identify as liberal and way different than I. Okay, let's just say that. But he wrote a great article. He said, how is this any different than saying, okay, let's look at a person, how curly or not his hair is, how dark his skin is. Okay, he looks like that. We're going to now put him through random searches of his home because he might do evil things in the name of his Middle Eastern religion toward Americans. You don't get to do that.
No, you don't. I was thinking the same thing.
But for some reason, they want to do it with people who say we are or we're planning to homeschool. Now here's another point, and I got to get going soon.
Yeah.
You think about this: if the real motive is to prevent harm from children, and I'm not arguing for this, by the way, okay, is 2-week winter holiday or Christmas break, whatever you want to call it, is that long enough for public school parents to hurt their children?
I would think so.
Yeah, so why not random visits, sometime between day 7 and 12, random visit of every public school home during winter break? Now, and people might say, well, that's silly. Okay, let's take summer break, 3 months.
Yeah.
Is 3 months long enough to abuse, starve, harm, kill somebody?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So why don't we start doing all kinds of new laws to control what happens in public school, private school, Catholic school, Lutheran school, Montessori school, independent, secular, humanist, private school homes every summer to try to prevent evil being done by parents? That is not American. That's not a free.
Same line of thinking. It actually is the same line of thinking. It's a really good point.
Yeah. So those are just some thoughts, and really, I just want to say to your audience and you that all of this goes back all the way down. What are your basic values, beliefs, and presuppositions about how a civil government should work and how it should control or not its citizens?
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for joining me. It was really nice to chat with you today and to hear your.
Send them to our website. Should I tell them? Or are you going to put it on there?
Tell them, and I will put it on there.
Okay, National Home Education Research Institute, NHERI.org. NHERI.org.
Great. Thank you, Brian.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Have a great day.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Please tell me what you think in the comments below. If you like this video, please click thumbs up. And if you want to hear more videos like this, please click the subscribe button and the notification bell next to it. In the meantime, happy homeschooling and have a great day.